off in the world of streaming and talk a little bit of Netflix, which is kind of becoming the go-to place for all things video game that are in the entertainment industry. They've got quite a list of shows coming out here. Have you had a chance to kind of look over and see some of the shows they have coming out?
I did, yeah. And I mean, you're definitely right. I mean, especially in the last, I want to say last couple of years, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, there's a lot of investments in that video game adaptation to a TV show or streaming show, if you will. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see where that's been going lately.
Yeah, and it's kind of defied the normal logic of video game movies have to be campy that we've seen a lot in the past, and they've been really well. Like Witcher season 1 was just an epic fantasy TV show, and even the Castlevania stuff has been really well done on there.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it this way. There's been attempts like this in the past. Like we obviously think about like the really bad and sometimes the really campy. Like obviously the best you could say it was a really good adaptation was maybe the first Mortal Kombat movie. But that's because the premise was cheesy on its own anyway, like the fate of the world being decided in a fighting tournament across dimensions. So you roll with that, turn it into a movie. Yeah, people are going to at least line up and see that. And it was for what it was at the time, it was pretty successful. But then of course you have the Super Mario Brothers movie, which the less said about that, the better. But I also think it's interesting too, because you think about where we are now. I mean, I think a lot of people back then, like games have been popular for a while. I mean, it's definitely at its apex now, but even then, like the hotness of Nintendo and Sega at the time in the 90s, that's where really the video game industry really started to get its footing. And I always feel like Hollywood was a little too quick to adapt at the time, just looking at a cash cow and thinking, I want a piece of that. I could turn that into a movie or a show. And the problem at the time was, as much as those games were really good, like you had your Marios and Sonics and everything there, I would argue that they weren't really that ripe for storytelling across a different medium. Like, just because of the fact that the technology wasn't really there to really do that. I mean, of course, you had your stuff like your Zeldas and your Final Fantasies and anything Square did that
were more
took it to that level.
And give you some to build on.
Exactly, which kind of made me wonder why people didn't look to those games more than anything else. But I understand they weren't at the popularity level of Mario and Sonic at the time. So I think at the time they were trying to pull something out there when storytelling really wasn't at its apex then. Yeah. Now you fast forward to where we are now, and you can do that with the technology and with the kind of production values that would rival a movie TV show, that you could turn something like that into a movie TV show. You just mentioned Castlevania. That is like one of my, not just favorite video game adaptations, one of my favorite animated shows in like the last 10 years. They did a really fantastic job. I still have to see season 4 to wrap it up. But I mean, the first 3 were just amazing. So I feel like there's been an involvement, and Hollywood's had to learn a little bit of lessons over time, which is why you're now seeing, as you pointed out, all those new shows that are starting to come to play, because now we can actually tell the stories we want to tell.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because I mean, most of this list, it makes a lot of sense. Of kind of like the confirmed ones you had. Resident Evil has 2 of them, which we've already seen work in movies. One's more of an anime, the other one's going to be a live action. Witcher season 2, of course. Angry Birds makes sense because they already had the movie franchise to build off of. They have a Far Cry one coming out, a Splinter Cell. Like all those make sense to me. The biggest one that was kind of like tilted my head at is a Cuphead show.
Yeah, I mean, that one's been known for a couple of years, I think, ever since the game first came out. But I mean, if you look at the game, I don't know. Have you played Cuphead?
I've played parts of it. I haven't gotten through the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I beat it after banging my head many times at a lot of those boss levels. It's a notoriously hard game, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware of that there. But I mean, the aesthetic behind it, I mean, it's an homage to old Disney cartoons. So it only made, when they announced that was becoming a Netflix show, it felt like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious to see how they handle that one, because that one has, I think, the most potential to go into that kind of corny, campy realm.
Right.
Out of all of them. But that one was the only one I kind of like, I'm not fully sure how this is going to go, but it'll be interesting. They're also bringing Sonic back to the animated world, because that had a successful run back in the 90s. And even the newest Sonic movie was pretty decent.
Which I have not seen, but yeah, everyone's telling me it's like actually pretty good homage to the franchise.
It stays pretty kind of faithful to what the game was, but is lighthearted enough to make it work in kind of the real world. It's interesting. It's definitely worth it. Kind of like Pokemon. Have you seen the Detective Pikachu movie?
I'm afraid to say I haven't seen that either.
Okay, because they both kind of follow that same vein of kind of taking this kind of more obscure premise of like odd creatures living in the real world and mixing it really well with making it feel like it belongs in the real world around you. Mm-hmm. But any on the list that have you super excited that they have coming up?
I mean, Witcher season 2, of course. Although I would say they're really basing that more on the books rather than the games. I mean, I think the video games obviously made the books more popular when they came out there. So the video game effect is what's leading to this here. But they're saying this is more based on the actual books than anything else. But I'm still excited for her. The first season was fantastic. Of course, Castlevania season 4. That spin-off series that is interesting. Kind of not surprised because that's the whole premise of Castlevania is that the Belmonts and Dracula are fighting throughout the ages. So that's pretty cool to see them take on that. The Splinter Cell one is more intriguing to me and more I kind of more want to watch it to kind of sit in the back and eat popcorn while I read the comments of people who comment on that, because the fans of that franchise have been aching for a Splinter Cell game for years. Like, we haven't had a game in the Splinter Cell franchise since the 360. So it's skipped an entire generation, if you think about it. And Ubisoft keeps teasing it in other ways, like in mobile games. There's supposedly this hero shooter they're going to be doing, like Overwatch. That's revealed tomorrow. They just made an announcement. They're going to reveal that tomorrow. He's in there, but it's not a Splinter Cell game. It's like an Ubisoft shared world shooter. It's just funny to see it because he's getting every other kind of exposure, animation and otherwise, except his own game. Exactly. And the fans are just like tearing their hair out. And I'm just like, I would love the new Splinter Cell game here, but at the same time, I'm like, not a big rush. I'm just enjoying the fire that's been put in the fans' belly. But I mean, I'd be curious to see I'd be curious what they do with that too. Animated stealth espionage show. I can't really think of any recent animated shows that really have done that. I wonder if they'll get the same guy, Michael Ironside, to do it. But although it looks like it may cast him younger, so maybe not. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's going to be in the interest of because I can't really think of any shows, at least on the Western side. I'm sure there's some animes and stuff that are more along that premise, but it's a different approach to it because usually that kind of thing goes more of like the James Bond, Mission Impossible live action way, I'd say, than animated usually. So that'll be interesting. I'm also curious to see how the Assassin's Creed TV series they've been teasing comes out, because the movie, it tried, but it never quite found its footing for me.
Same.
So I'm kind of curious to see. I can see it working better as a TV series because there's so many moving parts to it between both like the current and the past and jumping back and forth and everything, that it makes more sense to me to give it more room to breathe, where you could almost go like every other episode is historical location versus real world impact of that kind of thing, and kind of make it work that way so you're not trying to shove it all into 2 hours and kind of expand on both sides of the universe. But I'm curious to see how that goes. I'm also kind of curious to see the reception to like the Cyberpunk series. Given the mixed bag that Cyberpunk has become between everybody that plays it loves it, but it's also that kind of, we kind of feel like we got screwed over in the process of loving this.
Well, I mean, I feel like Cyberpunk will maybe get a little bit of pass just because of the studio behind it. I forget the name of it, but they're supposed to be a really well-renowned Japanese anime studio. They might get a pass just in the fact that they would probably love to see their take on just Cyberpunk in general. I mean, putting the game aside as it is, I mean, I still claim it's a good game. The uproar is more on the bugs.
Yeah, I know he says it's a well-put-together game. It's just kind of more of the problems that have come with it.
Yeah, I mean, that stigma is not going to go away for a while. And CD Projekt Red has got a lot of goodwill they need to make over the years there. But even beyond that, hopefully people can recognize that it's the studio that's doing this has nothing to do with that.
And then probably the only other rumor that's kind of an oddball that I didn't expect to see is the rumor of a Beyond Good and Evil live-action film.
Can they focus on getting the game out first?
Yeah. But I mean that to me was just kind of like this seems like kind of the oddball on this list that they're already promising a film based off of this.
I'm fascinated by that because I mean it has this cult following from the first game from like 15 plus years ago, but even like I mean I've never really seen the appeal, like what it brings to the table and why there's such a big thing about the sequel and now this live action show.
Yeah.
So am I missing something? Is there something I'm missing?
I mean, I found it. I mean, I get like the humorous kind of fun of the original. Like I get kind of the campy feel of it all and people's love of it. But it was never one that I was like, I want more of this. It was kind of just one of those. This was kind of like a fun old school game.
Right.
Awesome, let me move on.
Which is interesting because it looks from at least from the trailers that they showed of that sequel, it seems to be going darker.
Yeah.
So that's funny how they're kind of 180 that. But anyway, that's the game here. The series is just weird in the fact that it's actually something being developed for something that's a cult franchise.
Yeah, and they have Final Fantasy as a potential live action TV series on Netflix. That one's interesting to me because of how the Final Fantasy universe works. Are they going to place themselves in one of the games and expand on that? Or are they going to go kind of like the movie route where they tried to create like this other universe for Final Fantasy and kind of follow the route of the games where it's its own contained piece and it didn't quite go so well?
Probably the latter, I would say, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's sticky because of the fact that every Final Fantasy game is different.
Yeah.
And what do you do? Do you make each season a game if you were to take the ones that already exist?
Like place yourself in like one season and just say, okay, we're going to do more Adventures of Cloud or something as the main character and go with it and just pick one of the popular ones. Because I kind of feel like they're almost going to have to find a way to bring some of those in because I could see I can see people wanting to see like Tifa and Cloud and stuff in a TV series.
I feel like that's probably the smarter way to go because of the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake came out last year, and then they're working on those sequels as we speak. That's gonna, and it's the more popular of the Final Fantasy series. I still maintain that 6 is one of the best ones, but I know I get why 7's got that appeal. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's if they're going to really get that audience, that would probably make most sense. Do it with characters that people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And then they could say, hey, we're going to now do a spin-off of like Final Fantasy Origins, for example.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. We'll talk more about Final Fantasy Origins and things like that, though, later. One of my unhappy E3 moments.
Oh, boy. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that one.
So we'll get into that.